Well, after a contentious election process, Donald Trump, as we mentioned, officially we hear will be the 47th president of the United States.
And this election saw a significant voter turnout and widespread engagement in the electoral process. NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett joining us from Madison, Wisconsin, with more on the race. Maura, thanks for joining us. Obviously, with Wisconsin, the Democrats hoping that it would go for them, and it did not. First, though, what can you tell us about the mood and the immediate reaction following Trump's win there?
Well, it depends who you ask, guys. I've spent a lot of time over the last few days up in northern Wisconsin, in those Green Bay suburbs, those key Republican counties the Democrats are hoping to break into a little bit more, and then down here in Madison and Dane County. Now, Dane County is a reliably blue county in Wisconsin. It's one where voting turnout is also extremely reliable, really high turnout here. But then as I checked in with voters that I met over the weekend up in northern Wisconsin, they're celebrating. They're very excited that it turned out the way that they wanted it to. They told me earlier this week they had voted for former President Trump because they wanted a better economy and they wanted their borders to be protected. They were very concerned about what they called issues with illegal immigration. But here in Dane County, as I'm spending the morning talking with students, young voters, first-time voters, there's an overwhelming feeling of disappointment, confusion, fear. I talked to several people who said that they either went to bed crying last night or woke up first thing this morning and the first thing they did was cry. And so it's a range, as one can expect coming from a battleground state. I think there was a level of hope and optimism here in Dane County, given that the race was just called for the Democratic candidate for Senate, Tammy Baldwin. She served the state for a long time here. And so there is at least that balance that they're looking at. But ultimately, big picture, it's a mixed bag here in Wisconsin, guys.
Well, and just a few moments ago, we had our political analyst on and we talked about basically the shift in what was the blue wall in Wisconsin being part of that. Now all red. We're seeing Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. I'm just curious what you're hearing on the ground as far as any sort of key factors that might have tipped the scale in Donald Trump's favor. Are you hearing about any particular issues from any specific voters, any demographics that you're hearing with the shift in voter sentiment?
Yeah, there's a few factors that I think are starting to percolate this morning. I think first off, going into election night last night, we knew that the race was so tight. It was going to come down to ground game. And the Democrats were feeling very confident about that. But it turns out that there might have been more of a quiet approach from the Trump campaign, from Republicans. One of the super PACs, Turning Point USA, was leading a lot of the organization in these battleground states. And there was hope from Democrats that there'd be even more turnout among women. There was a big gender gap that we were talking about in terms of the divide between women voting for Harris and men voting for Trump. And I think the young men aspect was one that might have been slept on a little bit. That the young male demographic really coming out for former President Trump. A lot of those late deciders, first-time voters, all breaking for Trump across these battleground states. And one of the issues that really stands out in terms of the Republican side was what we mentioned earlier, the immigration, as well as the economy, inflation. And something that I've heard as I've reported across the battleground states, I covered Pennsylvania last cycle, been more in Wisconsin and the Midwest this cycle. But people really talk about how Trump took on foreign policy back when he was president, taking office in 2016. And they're looking for that again. A lot of disappointment around the wars that are going on abroad, in general, foreign policy taking on China when it comes to trade, that kind of thing. And that's something that really resonates in those blue wall states where agriculture, manufacturing are really important. And so that definitely seems to have had a factor here as well.
Maura, here's a loaded question for you. As you kind of alluded to, Democrats kind of dropping the ball, whether it be, women in suburban areas, whether it be the young vote, they're calling that the bro vote, whether it's, people talking about she didn't do the Joe Rogan podcast, obviously, which is a specific thing. What happens now? The strategy for the Democratic Party, it looks fractured. How do they fix it? And then how do they make it more inclusive and then, really resonate with working class folks across America? Because it's a resounding vote for Trump. I mean, still winning the popular vote, and it looks like he's going to take that home.
The Democrats are going to have to learn a lesson from this. I don't think it's something that they weren't aware of in talking with Democratic strategists over the last couple of months, but they were hopeful that the way the country would play out would be a little different. When I was talking with some students here this morning, something that they even brought up is they said they want to see the Democrats elevate more young voices, more maybe people, new voices into the party to help aggregate people behind them, coalesce them behind them. But then they also said they wanted to see Democrats work to talk to people in these rural counties better. They were disappointed by how that might have played out, and I think that is an assessment too that we could look at around the selection of Vice President candidate Tim Walz coming from Minnesota. That was a very purposeful selection by the Harris campaign in an effort to work to coalesce the Midwestern votes. But I covered the VP selection race back in the summer, and in Minnesota, all of the Democratic strategists there pointed out that Minnesota looks a lot different than the rest of the Midwestern states. Things that go on in Minnesota don't necessarily resonate here in Wisconsin, let alone in Pennsylvania. And so that's something that the Democrats are definitely going to have to work on. But as for right now, I think they're going to try to maintain balance and peace. And what I've heard from voters, at least this morning, is they don't want this result to silence their voice or silence anyone's drive to work hard to make sure that their voices are heard. And so over the next 75-ish days until the transition, Democrats looking to push any extra policies that they can before Trump takes office, as well as the Congress control being flipped. So I think we'll see a lot of pushes that way. But in terms of the next 4 years, next 2 years, I guess, until the midterms, there's going to have to be some reassessment happening.
All right. Maura Barrett, thank you so much.